The subcommittee will come to order. After recognizing myself and the ranking member, my good friend Ted Deutsch, for 5 minutes each for our opening statements, I will then recognize other members seeking recognition for 1 minute. We will hear from our witnesses then, and without objection, the prepared statements of our witnesses will be made a part of the record, and members may have 5 days to insert statements and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. Before we begin with our opening statements, I would like to remind my colleagues that this hearing is meant to focus strictly on the humanitarian crisis in Syria. It is not meant to be a debate on the chemical weapons situation, the potential use of military force, or the Russian proposal. Our witnesses have joined us today to discuss their area of expertise and responsibility and will not be expected to discuss anything beyond that scope. And I thank everyone in advance for your cooperation. We're also very glad to have Mr. Smith joining our subcommittee today. He is the ranking member, he's the chairman of the Africa Global Health and Human Rights Subcommittee. Thank you, Mr. Smith, who's been a real leader on refugee issues. The chair now recognizes herself for 5 minutes. While much attention and great amounts of deliberation have been focused on the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian conflict and what the proper U.S. response may be, we must also continue to highlight the increasingly dire humanitarian crisis. Since this conflict began in March 2011, the numbers of those impacted have grown exponentially and are truly shocking and devastating. Nearly a full 1/3 of Syria's population is in dire need of humanitarian assistance and has been displaced by the conflict. By most estimates, there are now nearly 5 million Syrians, 5 million, who are now internally displaced persons. Unable or unwilling to flee Syria to find sanctuary elsewhere for whatever reason, these IDPs are extremely vulnerable. The vast majority of them are women and children and the elderly, who end up staying in unofficial shelters, unfinished buildings, and makeshift accommodations, making it extremely difficult to get them the basic necessities that they require. There have also been over 2 million Syrians who have risked their lives to flee the fighting in Syria and have sought refuge in other countries, with over 1 million of those refugees being children under the age of 18. Over 97% of these refugees flee to Syria's neighboring countries, like our ally Jordan, or to Turkey, Lebanon, Egypt, and Iraq. We have seen hundreds of thousands flee to each of these countries, and this mass influx of refugees weighs heavily on their economies and their security situations. Perhaps the two countries most greatly impacted by the refugee crisis are Lebanon and Jordan. Lebanon is home to anywhere between 700,000 to 1 million Syrian refugees who are living with host communities or in settlements, and whose presence introduces a complex and potentially dangerous situation, as we have witnessed with multiple cross-border incidents and spillover violence. While the political situation in Lebanon already is tenuous at best, this massive influx of refugees further destabilizes the country and threatens to upend the fragile government and pull Lebanon into the conflict, a situation that would not only have serious ramifications for regional and U.S. national security, but would severely exacerbate the humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, Jordan has pledged to keep its borders open to those fleeing Syria, despite the heavy burden that this places on the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, whose ambassador is with us today, and I would like to briefly recognize her. Welcome, Madam Ambassador. And our subcommittee had met privately with her before this subcommittee about this refugee crisis. Jordan continues to be an important ally of the United States. Official numbers place the number of refugees in Jordan at well over 500,000, but those numbers may be much higher, as we heard from the ambassador this morning, due to the large number of unregistered refugees. While some Syrians live in camp within Jordan, most live amongst host communities. In fact, one camp is home to over 120,000 refugees, which would be Jordan's fourth largest city. The United States, through the work of the State Department and USAID, continues to provide humanitarian assistance to those impacted by the Syrian conflict. We are the single largest contributor of humanitarian assistance for the Syrian people, providing aid to nearly 4 million people live in Syria with the assistance of the UN and local and international organizations and NGOs. Our assistance, along with the assistance provided by our friends in the EU, the UK, and the UAE, will provide food, medical care, clean water, and shelter for those affected by the conflict. This is a massive undertaking, and with no end in sight to the Syria conflict, it is important that we evaluate the situation and its implications for the region, as well as the programs we have in place to support ongoing and future developments. Half of these Syrians in need are children who need something or someone to turn to. If the United States doesn't step up to assist them, these children may turn to the Islamic extremists who would seek to take advantage of their vulnerability and radicalize them, further threatening the stability of the region and our security interests. For the well-being of the millions impacted, for the stability and security of the region, and for our own national security interests, we must continue to seek ways to aid these millions who desperately need our help. With no end in sight to the conflict, these numbers will continue to add up, causing increased pressure on the region and directly threatening the U.S. and our allies. And with that, I turn to my good friend, the ranking member, Mr. Deutsch of Florida.